He threw it all away. That's the thought that loops in my head, a relentless burning mantra. Kieran didn't just end a relationship. He took 8 months of my life, of my hope, and discarded it like it was nothing because he couldn't handle being with a woman who stands for something. I'm Alara. I'm 28, and I'm still trying to piece together the wreckage of a man I thought I knew. I'm trying to understand how someone so seemingly solid could shatter into a stranger overnight. It began in January, under the soft, diffused lighting of a local art gallery. The air smelled of wine and intellectual pretense, a combination I usually found exhausting. But that night was different. My friend had dragged me to her cousin's exhibition, and I was making my third lap around the same collection of abstract sculptures when I met him, Kieran. He was 30, with a quiet confidence that set him apart from the boisterous crowd. He had kind eyes that actually seemed to listen and a steady presence that felt like an anchor in the swirling room. He worked in logistics, something corporate and stable that he described with a self-deprecating humor. We talked for over an hour, leaning against a wall, ignoring the art entirely. He asked me about my job in healthcare administration, about my passions, my frustrations with the world. He didn't flinch, not even once, when I mentioned my involvement in local advocacy groups for women's rights. Instead, he'd nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That's impressive," he'd said. "It takes courage to fight for things." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime of dating emotionally stunted boys in men's bodies, I felt seen. Here was a man who didn't seem intimidated by my convictions. He wasn't trying to compete with me or diminish me. He was just there, present. The early months were idyllic, the kind of perfect that feels almost cinematic. He planned dates with an old-fashioned intentionality I thought was extinct. He'd pick me up, open the car door, and insist on paying, even though I made it clear I was more than capable of handling my own bills. It wasn't about the money, it was the gesture. He wanted to take care of me, but not in a way that felt controlling. It felt like respect. Our conversations were the foundation of what I thought we were building. We could talk about anything: our childhoods, our career ambitions, the silly minutiae of our days. And he never shut me down when I steered the conversation toward the issues that ignite a fire in my soul. I've always been vocal. My social media is a curated feed of educational content on social justice, intersectional feminism, and systemic inequality. It's not a hobby, it's an extension of who I am. Kieran seemed to embrace it. He'd like my posts, occasionally leaving a simple but supportive comment. When I'd patiently explain the nuances of systemic oppression or the gender wage gap, he'd listen intently, a student absorbing a new language. I mistook his silence for contemplation, his nods for agreement. I thought I was sharing my world with him, and that he was eagerly stepping into it. I thought I had finally found a partner who understood that being a strong, independent woman didn't mean I didn't also want to be loved and supported. Around month 6, things felt permanent. We were spending nearly every night together, my toothbrush a fixture in his bathroom, his favorite coffee mug sitting on my kitchen counter. We started talking about moving in together, casually at first, then with more serious intent. We scrolled through listings for 2-bedroom apartments, imagining a future where we'd build a home. We even touched on marriage, not in specifics, but in the abstract: what we both wanted long-term, our shared values, our goals for a life built on mutual respect. I really believed him. I believed in the portrait he painted of himself, the supportive partner, the modern man, the quiet ally. I see now that the canvas was blank all along. He was just a mirror, reflecting back the man he thought I wanted to see. And I, so desperate to believe that man existed, fell in love with a beautiful, hollow reflection. The illusion of perfection is a fragile thing. It doesn't shatter all at once. It develops hairline cracks, so small you can convince yourself they're just tricks of the light. The first crack appeared around the 7-month mark, a subtle shift in the atmosphere between us that I couldn't quite name. It started with the jokes. Kieran had always had a dry wit, but now it carried a new, sharper edge, one that was almost always pointed at the things I held dear. One evening, I was scrolling through my phone while we were on the couch, and I shared an article about the insidious nature of toxic masculinity. It was a well-researched piece, insightful and nuanced. I expected him to read it, or at least acknowledge its importance. Instead, He glanced at the headline and let out a short, dismissive laugh. God, some people take this stuff way too seriously, don't they? I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. What do you mean by that? He immediately backpedaled, reaching over to squeeze my shoulder. Hey, I'm just kidding. It's just intense, you know? He waved a hand vaguely. Everything's a problem these days. He said he was kidding, but his tone was cold. It was the first time he had labeled my passion as intense, framing it as a negative, an overreaction. I tried to explain why the topic mattered, why it wasn't just an abstract idea, but something that affected real lives, including his. He just nodded, that same placid, non-committal nod I had once mistaken for deep thought. But this time, it felt different. It felt like a wall. Soon after, I noticed his tendency to steer our conversations away from anything substantive. If I brought up a current event related to reproductive rights or a story of workplace discrimination, he would listen for a moment before deftly changing the subject. Hey, did you see that new sci-fi movie is out? We should go this weekend. Or, that reminds me, we need to book that restaurant for my mom's birthday. At first, I made excuses for him. He works hard. Maybe he's just tired of heavy topics after a long day. I'm the passionate one, he's more laid back. It's about balance, right? I told myself I was being overly sensitive, that I was looking for problems where there were none. The relationship was so good in every other way. Why would I want to sabotage it over a few offhand comments? But the cracks kept appearing. I'd show him an article breaking down the complexities of systemic privilege, filled with data and credible sources. I would watch his eyes glaze over as I spoke. The man who once listened with rapt attention now seemed to be mentally checking out, waiting for me to finish my lecture, so we could get back to something lighter, easier. It was a quiet, creeping disillusionment. The partner I thought was learning and growing alongside me was, in reality, just tolerating a part of me he found inconvenient. He wasn't a student. He was a bored audience member waiting for the intermission. That cold knot of dread in my stomach began to tighten. I had this chilling realization that maybe, just maybe, he didn't see my convictions as a part of me to be cherished, but as a quirk to be managed. And I was too in love, too invested in the beautiful portrait he'd first shown me, to admit that the man I was falling for might not actually exist. An ally who is silent in the face of injustice is not an ally at all. They are a spectator. And I was beginning to realize I was dating a spectator. The undeniable proof came one Saturday night at a get-together hosted by his friend Mark. Mark's apartment was filled with the kind of people Kieran felt comfortable with, easygoing, surface-level, and deeply uninterested in rocking the boat. I was in a conversation with two other women when one of them, a bubbly girl who seemed to think feminism was a historical artifact, declared that the fight for women's rights was basically over. I mean, we can vote and work, she said with a dismissive shrug. What more do we need? It feels like we're just complaining now. I couldn't let that slide. It wasn't in my DNA. So, calmly and patiently, I began to explain. I talked about the wage gap, the glass ceiling, the disproportionate burden of domestic labor, the daily microaggressions that wear women down. I wasn't attacking her. I was trying to educate her, to fill in the gaps in her understanding with facts and lived experiences. The whole time, Kieran was sitting right next to me. I could feel his discomfort radiating off him in waves. He shifted in his seat, stared intently at his beer bottle, and avoided my gaze. He didn't contribute a single word. He didn't nod in agreement with my points. He didn't back me up. He just sat there, a statue of silent anxiety, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. Here I was, performing the emotional labor of educating a stranger in a room full of his friends, and my own partner couldn't even offer a simple gesture of solidarity. The car ride home was thick with attention I could have cut with a knife. For several minutes he just drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Finally, he spoke, his voice carefully neutral. You were a little intense back there, Alara. The word stung. Excuse me? Since when is educating someone on basic human rights intense? We were guests in someone's home, he said, his voice tightening. It was a casual party. Maybe you could have just let it go. Let it go? I was incredulous. So I should just sit there and smile while someone spreads misinformation about issues that affect half the population? Kieran, these aren't opinions. These are documented facts about how our society operates. I just mean, we were there to have fun, not to debate politics. And that was it. That was the line that revealed everything. To him, my core beliefs, the fight for equality and dignity, were just politics, an unpleasant topic to be avoided at social gatherings. For me, they were a matter of basic moral responsibility. The fact that he couldn't see the difference was a chasm between us that I suddenly feared was unbridgeable. After that night, the pattern escalated. He became openly critical of my online activism, which he now framed as me arguing with strangers on the internet. My friend Isa, who was just as passionate and outspoken as I am, would come over, and Kieran would suddenly have an urgent work project to attend to in the other room. He was actively avoiding being in the presence of women who spoke their minds. Then came the subtle digs at my appearance, a classic manipulation tactic I should have recognized immediately. If I wore a sharp blazer for a big presentation at work, he'd comment that I looked intimidating. When I wore my hair in a sleek, professional ponytail, he'd say he preferred it down because it was softer, more feminine. He was trying to sand down my edges, to mold me into a more palatable, less threatening version of myself. He wasn't celebrating the strong, confident woman he claimed to have fallen for. He was trying to diminish her. He was trying to make me smaller, and for the first time, I felt a surge of cold, hard anger. He didn't want an equal partner. He wanted an accessory. The final brutal confrontation happened in the place where we had built our comfortable intimacy, his kitchen. We were making dinner, the scent of garlic and basil hanging in the air. It was a scene of domestic bliss, a perfect backdrop for the ugliest conversation of my life. We had been talking more seriously about moving in together, and I knew we couldn't take that step without addressing the chasm I felt widening between us. I needed to know if he was capable of being the man I needed him to be. I took a deep breath and began. Kieran, before we move forward with this, I need to be really clear about what's important to me. I need a partner who is a true ally. Not just someone who tolerates my beliefs, but someone who actively supports my work, who is willing to learn and fight alongside me against these oppressive systems. I thought I was being mature, laying my cards on the table before we made a major life decision, but the look on his face told me he saw it as an attack. His expression hardened, his posture stiffened. "You know, Alara," he said slowly, putting his knife down with a deliberate click. "I've been thinking about us a lot lately, and I'm not sure we're as compatible as I first thought." My heart sank. "What do you mean by that?" And then the dam broke. All the passive aggression, all the silent resentment he'd been harboring, came pouring out. "I don't really get why you're so obsessed with all this feminism and social justice stuff," he said, the word obsessed dripping with condescension. I stood my ground. "It's not an obsession, Kieran. It's a core part of who I am. It's how I see the world. If you have a problem with that, then you have a problem with me." I pointed out that his discomfort with outspoken women like me and my friend Isa was a textbook example of the internalized misogyny that feminism seeks to challenge. Instead of listening, he became defensive, his voice rising. He started spouting ignorant, recycled talking points. "Modern feminism has gone too far. It's just divisive, and it unfairly attacks men." He actually had the audacity to say that feminism makes relationships unnecessarily difficult because it teaches women to be suspicious of men instead of working together. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Working together? The whole point is to dismantle systems that are designed to benefit men at the expense of women. That's not a partnership, that's a power imbalance. Then he delivered the killing blow, the words that revealed the truth of who he was beneath the nice guy facade. "I don't think I could marry someone who identifies as a feminist," he said, his voice cold and final. "I want a partner who can appreciate traditional relationship dynamics, someone who won't analyze everything through a political lens." The air left my lungs. Traditional dynamics? You mean the ones designed to limit and oppress women? That's not a political lens, Kieran, that's history. Wanting a woman who won't challenge an unfair system is wanting to benefit from sexism. See? This is what you do," he shot back, his face flushed with anger. "You're calling me a sexist just for having a different opinion." "This isn't about whether pineapple belongs on pizza," I yelled, my voice shaking with rage and heartbreak. "This is about basic human equality and dignity." The worst part was when he said it, his voice dropping to a wounded, self-pitying tone. I feel like I've been walking on eggshells around you for months. I'm always afraid of saying the wrong thing, of setting you off and triggering another lecture. Setting me off. As if holding him accountable for his views was a flaw in my character. As if expecting my partner to engage with reality was an unreasonable demand. I wasn't volatile. I was just refusing to let ignorance go unchallenged. I looked at the man standing across the kitchen island from me, a stranger in a familiar face. If you think supporting women's rights is too much work, I said, my voice dangerously calm, then you are exactly the kind of man that feminism exists to challenge. He couldn't meet my eyes. I'm done with this conversation, he muttered. Maybe we should take a break, to think about what we both really want. A break. After 8 months of building what I thought was a life, he wanted a break because I refused to make myself smaller for his comfort. I knew in that moment that it was over. He hadn't just broken up with me, he had rejected the very essence of who I was. The next morning, I woke up with a sliver of foolish, desperate hope. The anger from the night before had cooled into a dull ache in my chest. I told myself that we had both been heated, that we had said things we didn't mean. Maybe, with the clarity of a new day, we could talk like two adults who cared for each other. I still loved him, or at least, I loved the man I thought he was. I texted him, my thumbs trembling slightly. Can we talk later? Maybe we can approach this with more patience. His response came within minutes, a cold, clinical sentence that shattered my remaining hope. I did a lot of thinking last night. I don't see how we can move forward with such fundamental differences. I called him immediately, needing to hear his voice, needing a real conversation instead of a cowardly text message. He answered, but his tone was distant, detached. He dumped me over the phone, as if our 8 months together were a casual fling. He recycled the same empty phrases. Fundamental incompatibilities, causing us both stress and conflict. Stress. As if fighting for human rights was some annoying hobby of mine that was inconveniencing his tranquil existence. He was framing my principles as the problem, my refusal to compromise on human dignity as the source of our conflict. The absolute worst part was his attempt at a gentle letdown. I think you'd be happier with someone who shares your passion for activism, he said, his voice laced with false sincerity. I just need someone more. Easygoing. Easygoing. The word hung in the air between us, a euphemism for compliant. For silent. He wanted a woman who would smile pleasantly while the world burned, who would never challenge his comfort or force him to look outside his privileged bubble. He didn't want a partner, he wanted a tranquilizer. He ended the call with the most insulting platitude of all. I really hope we can stay friends. You're an amazing person, Alara. Then he hung up, leaving me in complete, deafening silence. The shock came first, a numbing disbelief that it could all end so impersonally, so callously. But as the day wore on, the shock gave way to a white-hot, righteous anger. I thought about all the time. The emotional energy, the labor I had poured into him, the countless articles I'd shared, the patient explanations, the gentle attempts to broaden his perspective. I had tried to help him grow, and his response was to decide that growth was simply too much work. He hadn't just dumped me, he had wasted my time. He had pretended to be someone he wasn't for months, leading me on, letting me build a future on a foundation of lies. He knew from the beginning what I stood for, and instead of being honest about his inability to meet me there, he coasted on my emotional investment until it became inconvenient for him. His cowardice proved everything I had ever tried to teach him about toxic masculinity and emotional immaturity. When faced with a challenging conversation that required him to examine his own beliefs, he didn't rise to the occasion, he bailed. That night, feeling utterly alone and misunderstood, I did the only thing I could think of. I opened my laptop and went to a feminist community on Reddit. I typed out the whole story, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I poured out 8 months of hope, frustration, and betrayal. I hit post and waited, half expecting to be told I was too intense, too difficult. Instead, the support was overwhelming. Dozens, then hundreds, of women flooded my inbox and the comment section with similar stories. Stories of men who were allies until it required an ounce of effort. Men who loved the idea of a strong woman but couldn't handle the reality. Men who ran for the comfort of an easier, more traditional dynamic the moment they were challenged. Reading their words, I felt a profound sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the problem. My rage was justified. And for the first time since he'd uttered the word break, I didn't feel alone. 6 months passed. The sharp edges of the heartbreak began to dull, but the anger remained, hardening into a cynical, protective shell. I learned through a mutual friend that Kieran was engaged, to a woman named Audra. Curiosity, that masochistic impulse, got the better of me. My friend, sensing my need for closure, pulled up Audra's Instagram page. It was exactly what I expected, and 100 times worse. Her bio was filled with inspirational quotes about being a blessed wife and the joy of letting her man lead. She was, in every sense of the word, the easygoing woman Kieran had been looking for. The real gut punch was discovering that Audra was a nurse practitioner. She had an advanced degree, a challenging and respected career she had spent years building. Yet, according to our mutual friend, she was already talking about cutting back her hours, maybe even stepping away from her career entirely after the wedding to focus on building a home. She had climbed a mountain of education and professional achievement, only to voluntarily walk back down to live in the valley of his comfort. I saw photos of them at the same social events I used to attend with him. She was always smiling this wide, vacant smile, looking perfectly adorable and completely non-threatening. And Kieran, he looked relaxed, genuinely happy. The subtle tension that had always lived in his eyes when he was with me was gone. He looked like a man who had finally come home, a man who would never again be asked to be better than he was. He had found a woman smart enough to make him look good, but traditional enough to never challenge him on anything that actually mattered. The engagement had happened quickly, barely 6 months after he dumped me over the phone. It was proof that he was never interested in personal growth or working through difficult conversations. He just wanted to find the path of least resistance, and he found it in Audra. I tried to date again, but the landscape felt like a minefield. Every man I met seemed to fit into one of two categories: either completely oblivious to the concepts of feminism and privilege, or a performative ally whose support was a mile wide and an inch deep. I could now spot the red flags from a mile away: the subtle dismissiveness, the way their eyes would glaze over when I spoke passionately, the quick change of subject. Kieran hadn't just broken my heart. He had ruined my ability to trust. My friends told me I had dodged a bullet, that I deserved better. I knew they were right, but it was cold comfort when it felt like there were no better men left. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself thinking about Kieran and Audra. I imagine their life together, one of comfortable silences and unexamined privilege. He gets to ride off into the sunset with his Stepford wife, rewarded by society for choosing the easy path. And I'm left here, the difficult one, the intense one, still searching for a man who isn't a coward. But then the anger recedes, and what's left is a quiet, unshakable resolve. I am angry that I wasted 8 months on a man who wasn't worth my time. I am angry that men like him are praised for their weakness. But I am not sad for what I lost, because what I thought I had never truly existed. I'm done. I am completely done compromising my values or making myself smaller for the comfort of a fragile male ego. If being a feminist who lives her principles means I have to be single, then I will be single with my integrity intact. At least I will own my own life, my own voice, and my own mind. Unlike some people, I know that my education, my independence, and my self-respect are not things to be traded away for the illusion of security and the hollow prize of male approval. He may have found his peace, but I have found my power, and I will never ever let it go again.